Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the British Royal Armouries taking a look at some of the fantastically cool things in their reference collection, like this OTs-14 Groza. This is one of the early Russian 9x39mm rifle platforms, and it's a really interesting one. This was actually developed as a modular carbine rifle system with a whole bunch of different elements that you could take off or put on. In the late 1980s, the 9x39mm cartridge is developed for the Russian Federal Security Services. It is a subsonic cartridge. It's, in a lot of ways, think of it as the Russian version of 300 Blackout. Although it's primarily a subsonic cartridge, it's not meant to be sub and super at the same time. It was intended to be a really good suppressed subsonic cartridge. So you take 7.62x39, you neck it up to 9mm, put in a nice heavy bullet, and they have a variety of different loadings. They have some armor-piercing loadings, they have some non-armor-piercing loadings. The armor-piercing ones are better than not for going through armor, but they're still not as good as a full supersonic cartridge. Anyway, they developed the cartridge, and then they developed the VSS and the AS Val, which are essentially the same gun, to use those cartridges. And I have a previous video on the VSS if you're interested in seeing it. Now, fast forward a couple of years, and there's interest in coming up with something that uses that cartridge that is more of a general purpose rifle. And this is still, general purpose in quotes, sort of. This is still a rifle that's intended to be used by special forces, by the security service, more so than the Army. There will be some testing of this by the Army, but this is primarily meant for elite police units, SWAT teams, intervention teams, that sort of thing. So what they come up with here is, in a way, really cool. It is basically a big briefcase, or a big rifle case, with all of the different components for whatever sort of use you might need the rifle for. So you have the rifle itself, you have an underbarrel grenade launcher, which we have installed on this guy, you have a telescopic sight, you have a barrel with a vertical front grip instead of the grenade launcher, and when guys are going to deploy, they can take their rifle case, open it up, and assemble whatever version of the gun they need for that particular mission. Go out on a mission, whether it's assassinate a terrorist, rescue some hostages, whatever, come back, disassemble the gun back into the case, and then the next time they go out, they can put it together in some different configuration for a different role. So the gun was developed by two Russian engineers, Valery Telesh, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, and Yuri Lebedev. Telesh is the guy who developed the GP25 and the GP30 underbarrel grenade launchers, which we basically have here on this gun. Lebedev is probably best known today for his PL-15 Lebedev pistols. But initially, the very first versions of these were the OTS-12, and they were essentially AKS-74U Krinkovs, using the American term for them, that were just converted to 9x39. That ran for a short time, and then they upgraded the system, improved it to this modular design, which was the OTS-14. So production development began in 1992. The first guns were actually built in 1994, and production would run in 94 and 95. And interestingly, kind of like the OTS-12s, the production versions of the Groza were actually converted from AKS-74U Krinkovs, and you'll see that in just a minute. In fact, let's go ahead and take this apart, because it's got some really interesting features as well as some just legacy holdovers from the AK-74 series. Because this is a Bullpup setup, it is a very short, compact package. Now, we have it here with the underbarrel grenade launcher installed. Unfortunately, the armories don't have the complete set. They just have, actually have two of the guns in this configuration. Also worth pointing out that this is a later iteration. This is a 9A91 magazine, so it fits. It's another one of the 9x39 mags. What you will usually see in with pictures of the Groza is a curved, ribbed metal 9x39 magazine, but these appear to be interchangeable, and this is what the armories have. So go ahead and pull this out. Note that 9x39 mags are not interchangeable with 7.62x39. They are their own unique thing. That is part of why we don't have 9x39 guns in the US, is because the magazines are not the same. Looking at the receiver here, you can see that it is very much an AK-74 receiver. We have the original trigger mechanism here, which has been covered by a little block because the actual trigger, of course, is now up front, and there's a connecting linkage to run from the trigger back to the actual fire control mechanism. We still have the folding stock mechanism back here, and it's actually used, in fact, I'll just show you right there. The butt pad is on that stock folder, and you have to open it up like this in order to disassemble the gun, which we'll get to in a moment. Interesting, we still have the little notch here, and that would be for the Krinkov side folding stock latch to lock into. The top cover is pinned in place, just like a 74U. We still have a wooden handguard. In fact, it's really a holdover of the handguard and the gas tube from the 74U as well. However, they have milled off the front sight and rear sight blocks here and added this sight tower. The sight, we have a post up here. We have a rear aperture, and it has a 4-position rotating cam here that just drops that sight down from 50 out to 200 meters. I think there was a little bit of experimentation with exactly how they wanted to mount optics to it, because there is clearly this mounting surface up on top of the carry handle. However, there is also a side rail mount down here that would use those much more typical for Kalashnikov type optics. The grenade launching sight folds down when not in use, and I can just push this button in to lift it up. And then we have a front sight here on the end of what's not actually the barrel. That's a barrel shroud, which I'll show you in a moment. And we have the range indications, range markings on the grenade launcher. Kind of interesting that they actually have little holes punched in the grenade launcher that correspond with 1, 2, 3, and 400 meters. I'm not exactly sure what the intended, how exactly you aim these, because obviously you're not shooting 1 and 4 at the same time. I suspect one side of this is meant to use the front of the grenade as your front sight. The other side is meant to use the front sight, but I don't have a grenade, nor do I actually have an original manual for this to be able to tell. These were considered for export, by the way, which is why this one has markings in English. And one of the most interesting elements of the whole design to me is the underbarrel grenade launcher, because there's only one trigger, as you may or may not have noticed. It somehow has to work for both the rifle and the grenade launcher. And the way that works is you actually have a selector switch here for rifle and grenade launcher. And I can push this in and rotate it around to switch between the two. So in grenade launcher mode, you can see it's actually going to pull back the hammer of the grenade launcher here. In rifle mode, it does not. Now, the way the modular setup worked is you actually had 2 different fire control units. This one is permanently, well, integral to the grenade launcher. The rifle only one kind of ended out here and didn't have the grenade launcher on it. And we can take that off. To take this off, I just have to push in this release button, and then I can pull. There we go. Pull that forward, and the fire control group and this sort of handguard adapter both come off. This, by the way, is a muzzle loading grenade launcher, so it doesn't open at all. You put a round in the front, you line up the driving band with the rifling. When you fire it, put this into grenade launcher mode, you can see the firing pin in the back there being pulled down and then released. Now, it's a little tricky to see, but it is doing it. And then this rod right here is your rifle connecting rod. So in grenade launcher mode, it doesn't move. When I switch this back to rifle, that pushes back, which is going to then push on that pad right there inside the receiver, which tracks to that little lever, which then goes back into the fire control group. And if we open this, we can open the top cover. Note that just like the Krink, that top cover is pinned in place, well, because it is a Krink top cover. The recoil spring is normal. I can pull out our bolt and carrier. Again, it's essentially a Krinkov bolt and carrier. Well, I'm pretty sure what they did here was use an AKM bolt, which has the same bolt face diameter as the 9x39 round, with the small diameter stem of the AK-74 so that it would fit in the 74 bolt carrier. Now, if we go back in to follow the fire control connection, we've got our little lever right here, which comes to a rod there, which actuates the actual trigger. And by the way, that's what this oddball piece on the outside of the receiver is. That's the pivot pin for that connecting lever. All right, so that's the back end of the receiver. We have a standard gas tube up here. This sight bracket has been added on top, which is why this won't come out. You can, in theory, you can take this screw and this pin out and remove the handle and the optics rail there, but I'm going to leave that in place for the moment. That brings us to the front of the gun, where we have the actual barrel shroud. This looks like a long barrel, but it is not. It is just a threaded on shroud. So in the modular kit, you have this one that has a dovetail here to attach the grenade launcher, and it of course has the grenade launcher sights. You would also have a shorter shroud that screws on with a vertical front grip. So there's the actual barrel, threaded for the shrouds. Barrel length is 9.5 inches. For what it's worth, this gun weighs in at approximately 5.9 pounds in its short-barreled standard just carbine configuration, and more like 8.8 pounds with the grenade launcher attached. This thing has a whole lot of metal in it up here. And you can see we have 2 lugs on the underside of the barrel. Those lock into the fire control group here and here. So that's what this release button is actually releasing. So when you have your regular fire control group, it locks into these same 2 places. You've got the sort of the insert here to act as a part of a front handguard. And that's how it goes together. So there you go. There is the OTs-14 Groza all disassembled. I wish I had the full modular kit for you, but I think this should give you a pretty good idea of how the gun went together. Now, it's interesting to look at guns like this that are extremely exotic. You know, you don't find these anywhere, and we have a tendency to look at them and go, oh my God, that's the coolest stuff ever. You know, it's great because it's rare and hard to find. But it's interesting to look at some of the Russian feedback on this thing, which is really very much on the opposite end of the spectrum. In the hands of operators, these were okay, but not great by any means. There are a number of significant complaints about them. One, of course, is you can't use it left-handed because you've got the charging handle cycling right back here. You'll do some of your own homemade dental surgery if you try and shoot this left-handed. They were also extremely gassy with the suppressor on. It's an AKS-74 system. It's not really intended to prevent gas coming back at the operator, and this was apparently quite unpleasant to shoot with the suppressor. So in total, only a couple hundred of these were actually manufactured. There was an experiment, as I said, with Army or Spetznaz use, and they actually made a couple of experimental models in 7.62x39, and that would have been for Spetznaz use. That never ended up going anywhere. So I think originally there were plans, you know, the grand notion of this system was to also offer it in 5.45 and in 5.56, the Western cartridge. Those other 2 rounds don't appear to have ever gone anywhere. And the main production was all 9x39. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this look at a gun that we very rarely get a chance to see in the West. Thanks for watching. Big thanks to the Royal Armories for giving me access to this piece to show to you.